appreciate it.
Yeah.
I'm, let me see how it's spelled. Oh, there's an E there. Brienne. Okay, got it. No. I appreciate it. I mean, it's your
I don't know
name.
if you have to wave to the guy or not.
No, as soon as I start talking, he's probably filming already. And he's probably wondering,
To
what's
the
this?
guy in the corner. He's the microphone guy.
That's it. No, it's already
Just
going.
go.
Good afternoon. Thank you very much for joining us. I do appreciate it. My name is Peggy Meehan, and I'm with Visa Lighting. I'm going to start by doing a couple of house cleaning things. First, if you are looking for AIA credits, at the end of the program, please stop at the desk outside for your, give us your RA number so we can register you. If you're self-certifying, once you're scanned at the door, we will provide you with a certificate for that. Secondly, for program evaluations, when you get a chance, please visit LEDucation.org for evaluation for our speakers. And anything else at the end of the program? Question and answers. Hold them at the end of the program, and the ladies will be more than happy to answer you. Introduction for our Lighting for Behavioral Health. Lauren Roberts is a former lighting designer, currently based in Milwaukee, Wisconsin, having spent 9 years with prestigious firms such as GWA Lighting, Francis Kaufman Architects, and Susan Brady Lighting Design Studio. She has a variety of experience. She studied interior design at Philadelphia University and holds a Bachelor of Science. She has worked on numerous projects, including commercial, hospitality, retail, education, exterior facade, and landscape lighting, while always focusing on healthcare, her true specialty and passion. She is LC and EDAC certified and a dedicated member of the IES Healthcare Committee and Milwaukee chapter. Brienne Wilcox is a lighting designer from Detroit, Michigan. Through her background is a fine art, drawing, and interior design. She is intrigued by the pace of implementing new technology. She focuses on and has spoken about navigating aspects of LED specification, including product research, comparison, and evaluation, as well as integrating new standards of LED into specification documents. She is president of the Illuminating Engineering Society in Detroit, lighting certified through the NCQLP, and was named honorary affiliate of AIA in 2014. Ladies, I turn it over to you.
Thanks, Peggy. Okay. All right, well, thanks everyone for joining us today. This actually all started because we got to go on a trip together that was focused on behavioral health and really just learned that we don't know enough of it, and certainly it has not spread enough to where we're all kind of looking at it as something that we should be excited about and wanting to change and challenge what's going on out there. So hopefully by the end of this, we'll all kind of get you guys on the same boat with us. So just AIA slides here. So, okay. In the next 3 years, actually, 14% of construction will be placed into specialty hospitals. At the top of the list is behavioral health, and so we're going to go through different construction data with you today. And so behavioral health, among other project types, which will account for 46% of the total construction. The Affordable Care Act is also driving the trend towards outpatient construction, and as patient experience becomes more closely tied to reimbursement in the hospital than ever before. So this presentation will help you understand about the types of patients, staff, and family in these areas, their special needs, and how to appropriately light for them, because it's not just one public area that we're serving, it's everybody. So patient, family, staff, they're all just as important. And we need to change the institutional public knowledge and stigma of what behavioral health is. So learning objectives that hopefully you guys will all take with you by the end of this is to understand the behavioral health population and construction needs. We're going to review codes and guidelines, all that fun stuff, and relevant resources one should use when designing for behavioral health, because it is very much spread in a lot of different directions. So we've collected it all for you. And we're going to show examples of successful designs and review some case studies that are out there. Again, give you more information on where to look if you're trying to talk to an end user and client about these factors, and We're going to go over reviewing lighting trends, such as circadian lighting, how that plays a role, and possible risks and benefits in behavioral health spaces, along with develop strategies for implementation of the light quality factors to promote emotional well-being. And we'll go into light levels and things like that, other design guidelines that you should turn to. So we've broken this down into 5 different categories to hopefully keep everybody at the same pace here. So we're going to talk about understanding. So again, the people, the construction, the history, your codes and guidelines, different case studies, the risks and benefits, and then the implementation strategy part. So with that, I'm going to pass it over to Brienne, and we're going to be bouncing back and forth, so bear with us here.
So I find the stigma aspect of this is still alive and well, even in the lighting community, and it's interesting to talk to specifiers who work on behavioral health units who actually know very little about the physiological responses of someone who is needing to be an inpatient especially or outpatient care. And when we go into designing spaces to be empathetic and to be relatable, we perpetuate the stigma of mental illness by not using correct terminology and not being invested in that. So to me, it's extremely important. So there is a woman who has spent 365 days in her lifetime or so, cumulatively, in inpatient behavioral health care in 5 different hospitals. So if you can imagine spending a year of your life or more in a behavioral health unit, I think your perception of those spaces would change a great deal rather than the intermittent time with which you may have visited someone in the unit. When I asked her about light, she said, "I wish I had more control. It feels punishing. I wish my food looked better. And the lighting affects my mood. I think I'm not very optimistic when it's too dark." I know these are simplistic observations, but directly from a patient who also happens to be my mother, it's an interesting perspective. In addition to that, I've spent the last 25 years or so in a number of units as a visitor, and so it's a unique perspective to have to see someone's face and well-being and that kind of thing under different types of lighting. This is a breakdown, I think, that's interesting to me, the percentage of persons who struggle with an SMI, which is a serious mental illness within the United States. When we talk about serious mental illness, and I know that some of this might seem basic, but it's a really important sort of baseline of knowledge to have before you approach a design. I think all too often we jump right into the design part and we forget the people part. So a serious mental illness is a diagnosable mental, behavioral, or emotional disorder that in the past year has resulted in serious functional impairment. So when we talk about design solutions, we have to remember that there's a serious, functional impairment that manifests very differently than a typical healthcare, where you might have surgery and you're in an in-bed inpatient situation. 1 in 5 adults have experienced an episode, periodic or chronic, in mental illness, and nearly 1 in 25 have had a serious one. And I think that statistic is a lot higher than we might know. Thankfully, I think the Affordable Care Act has helped bring some of that into the limelight. Diagnoses and variations, these are important to know the differences because the different classifications, whether it's emotional, behavioral, or and the types of medications affect how someone experiences their own reality. Schizophrenia being one that is unfortunately often misrepresented in the media and that kind of thing, or in movies. But what's interesting to me about this, and we'll get into circadian rhythm and entrainment and some of the risks in that, or at least some of our perceived risks, is that the way in which someone experiences their day is very, very different depending on which aspect that they are being treated for. So you would treat someone who has depression very differently than you would treat someone who has schizophrenia or substance abuse and that kind of thing. So our one-size-fits-all model doesn't, it's not particularly beneficial. This is another statistic about the prevalence of mental illness, and I think it's a really important thing to drive at home that 1 in 100 American adults live with schizophrenia. 1 in 100. It's higher than I knew, for what it's worth. And 6.1 million of Americans are bipolar. and 16 million have major depression, and 42 million live with anxiety disorders. 42 million people. Inpatient versus outpatient treatment. This is an interesting study. I suppose it's a little small for you all. I apologize, but the serious mental illness, you can see the breakdown for who would pursue inpatient versus outpatient and prescription medication and that kind of thing. What's interesting about the relationship of a serious mental illness to that is that this would drive our construction assumptions about what's coming. Because when we are able to see a classification of who may need to be where, then we would stop having people who need inpatient behavioral health end up in a different unit that's not suited for them, including emergency departments, which is often where someone who is admitted can't get onto a unit. They may spend 3 or 4 days in the emergency room, which is an extremely stressful and aggravating situation for them.
So she mentioned the Affordable Care Act a little bit, and what was really great about this was that, well, it was the largest expansion in behavioral health coverage in a generation. So mental health and mental illness was taken very strongly. It became important because of the ACA, and the ACA will actually, because of this, expand mental health and substance use disorder benefits and parity protections for 62 million Americans because of the Affordable Care Act. So another thing it did was that most health plans now have to cover preventative services like depression screening, and if you've been to a counselor at all, even the simplest of mental health is usually covered under insurance now, which is really nice. So it's not being treated as, oh, you have a mental disorder, you need to go to a psych ward. You know, it's not that. There's so many different levels like we talked about. So it's nice that, again, we're just changing the stigma because of that. So it started in 2014. And also that plans won't be able to deny you coverage or change you more due to pre-existing health conditions. So we will see how that kind of changes with the course of where healthcare is going. But along with all the other statistics, it's that every year about 1 in 5 American adults suffers from some mental illness, enduring conditions such as depression, bipolar disorder, like Brian said. So when we talk about behavioral health construction and building types, there's probably much more than we've listed, but the basic ones are psychiatric hospitals, psychiatric units in a general hospital. So hospitals will have wings within a regular acute general hospital. And then there's also alcohol and addiction treatment facilities. So all of that's kind of wrapped under this behavioral health term. And behavioral health clinics and EDs with psychiatric specialties. And there's a lot more outpatient services now too, which we'll get into. But there's a lack of inpatient beds in all psychiatric hospital settings. So because of this, patients have nowhere to go but the ED, like Brian said. So my kind of question to you is something to think about is where would you go if you were suffering from a mental illness, a breakdown, depression, something tragic happened in your life? You can't really wait for your kind of insurance or counselor to get back to you all the time. So you need help now, something life-threatening, you go to the ED. Well, as a result, the psychiatric beds, there's shortages with them, and then there's increased use of the EDs for acute episodes. So because of that, they're actually doing more 23-hour observations. So units in psychiatric EDs are becoming more common now, but then it's not that 3 to 4 day holding term anymore. They're getting better about kind of speeding them up into different facilities.
Sorry, Lauren, would you define ED for me?
Oh, emergency department, sorry. Yeah, feel free to, we live in this all day long staring at these slides, so let me know if anything is going past. So outpatients facilities provide a lower cost among community integration. So part of changing the stigma with, not just thinking, mental health, that means psych ward, is making these little outpatient facilities break out into the community more. So if it's in your face more, you're seeing it more, we're getting away from padded walls kind of design. I mean, that all helps to change the stigma. So, and like I said, behavioral health, it could be anywhere from just a rehab facility where you're getting some counseling, all the way to a psychiatric ED. So it's kind of just making the term more, it's in all of our lives. I mean, you saw how many people it affects, so it's happening everywhere. I'm sure a lot of us in this room could use somebody to talk to, but another thing that's helping to change the stigma is and to give us more options is telepsychiatry. So your computer, I haven't talked to my doctor yet over the computer. I know this is a thing that's offered in our healthcare plan. Just curious, has anybody done this yet? New kind of virtual reality doctor's appointments? So counseling, I think for a lot of people who maybe are afraid to get out and talk to somebody, this could really be helpful too. So that's kind of helping to change that. And then because of that, less patients have to go to the ED if maybe they just need somebody to talk to or need to know at least the next step to go to anyway. So this allows clinicians to determine if the patient should be admitted for care when they do that 23-hour observation. Maybe they just need somebody for a day, they can go home, maybe they get recommended to go elsewhere. And then crisis stabilization units are actually emerging as a solution to acute psychiatric needs as well. So we're diverting psychiatric or crisis cases away from the ED and then keeping, so this is a quote actually, so keeping adults from jail and juveniles from detention centers, because it's not always that they need to go somewhere. I mean, maybe they're acting out because of a mental illness, not because they need to, go into a detention facility. So we need to understand why people are being provoked to live like this. So based on 2017 hospital construction survey from the Facilities magazine that came out just a few months ago. So this survey comprised more than 240 hospitals nationwide, about evenly split among rural, urban, and suburban facilities. And nearly 1/3 of the survey's respondents are undertaking specialty hospital construction. I'm going to show you what that means in a second. And then 50% of those say they're building or planning to build behavioral health centers and psychiatric hospitals in the next 3 years. So end users are starting to get the importance of this more and more, and we're going to start seeing more buildings because of this. So this is kind of the breakdown with acute care hospitals, the percentage that are specialty, which, I don't know, 7% doesn't seem like a lot, but out of that 7%, so specialty hospital could be behavioral health, children's hospital, cancer center, rehab facility, something like that. Behavioral health is by far at the top, and it takes credit for 50% of that. So that's how important it is, and that's why we need to start learning how to design for these specialty hospitals. We could, maybe next year we'll do a AIA presentation on the next, 5 ones after that. Let's see.
Still you.
Still me. So we went through the people, history, construction. Now we're going to go on to codes and guidelines, all that fun and exciting stuff, and where to look and who to lean on. So we've done a lot of research in the last year, finding out where to go for all these design guidelines, and whether it's foot candle levels or what codes or what do fixture manufacturers have to build to or live up to. So some things that I've found, and if you know more than this, please feel free to come on up afterwards and educate us, because it's definitely a growing thing here. So where we started was at patient safety standards for material and systems guidelines. So this is a recommendation by the New York State Office of Mental Health. So that's kind of the major one, that if you're doing behavioral health, you look at the NYOMH guidelines. And those are recommendations. So that is not kind of a strict, you have to do this no matter what. There are plenty of behavioral health facilities that do not go by those, but they are a really good set of guidelines. And some end users will make that their standard set of guidelines that you have to abide by. So I've seen both. And then there's the facilities that they're just renovating themselves from things at Home Depot. So, there's definitely a whole range of facilities out there. But so that's the main one. There is Design Guide for the Built Environment on Behavioral Health Facilities, distributed by the National Association of Psychiatric Health Systems. The VA has their own design guide. There's also FGI guidelines if you're an architect or interior in the room. I think you'll be more familiar with that. So there's portions of the FGI guidelines which goes into, so in the hospital guidelines, it'll go into psychiatric and behavioral health, but it's kind of all over the place. There's not like one true section. Then even within that section, there's not one true lighting for these environments. So again, you kind of have to read all of this when you're designing for one of these spaces. And then in the IES handbook, we do, and I'm going to go into this with light levels a little bit, but there is different areas built on like seclusion rooms and psychiatric and EDs and that kind of stuff, but not on like a patient bedroom kind of thing. So again, you have to kind of interpret all this data to your own use. So you can see why design isn't great maybe, because we don't have like a set of instructions for you. You got to look everywhere, or just refer back to this presentation afterwards. So codes needed. So some things that were kind of challenging this year with behavioral health is we know a few things about light fixtures that we'll get into, but impact resistance standards, how well, if you punch a wall or take out your aggression on a light fixture, shouldn't be kind of the same standards. So there's not really a standard for impact resistance. There's a thickness for acrylic. They say you need around 1/4 inch thick polycarbonate acrylic when you're doing a lens for a light fixture. But acrylic that's made now, or polycarbonate, you can have thinner, but it could be stronger. So now our materials are starting to change because our technology is starting to change. So it's not so much the thickness, but there's not really a standard for it. So shouldn't there be more than just a thickness called out in the standard somewhere? So that's just something that I don't have an answer to, but that's a need, I think. And for walls, there is a ASTM standard for thickness, so it's kind of, well, can we build off of that and keep going? So how about if you bend polycarbonate, if you have, this is what my engineers tell me anyway, if you have kind of an angle to it, it becomes more rigid. So are we talking about just a thickness when when a lens is flat versus when it's rounded or curved, angled a little bit? And so what does that do? And then does that change the thickness then? So what are these questions that we have to ask? Because when we figure out questions like this or get answers to them, then we can really start changing what these lighting fixtures look like so that they don't look like jail cell fixtures. We can really push that design limit if we can start playing with our materials more. So that's what I bring for the manufacturer side opposed to the designer side. And then how tough is tough enough, and how is that measured? So I've had manufacturers that will just go and beat a fixture with a bat and say, yep, we're good, or just punch it, and that's kind of, well, if it can take that abuse, you should be fine in a facility, but there's not really a standard for that. So should all fixtures fall under certain safety standards? And what is that? If we don't have it yet, how can we get there? Because I would like to push the boundary more, design-wise, to build light fixtures. So this is one of the major guidelines, design research and behavioral health facilities. So this all comes from the Center for Health Design. So if anybody's a member of this, it's just a great website online you can get to. And I'm an affiliate member. I know there's this whole knowledge repository where you can get that. That's where I got this. I'd be happy to share PDFs with you. But within this, there's a accumulation of 115 different articles on behavioral health. So if you're looking for more information, this is just a great resource relevant to behavioral health facility design, and with just different clear research methodologies. So not all lighting, but I think you kind of have to understand behavioral health as a full design and know that it's much more than just lighting before you can really design for it. But it's all post-1960 data, and it's current as of 2013 is when it was published, so great resource. And then design, we're going to get into case studies and examples of what works.
Okay, so when we talk about, it's interesting because this guideline has given some framework for how these projects end up successful, and it's interesting. It says environmental psychologists agree that physical environment can reinforce and encourage appropriate behavior. We know that logically or intuitively, but right now we're still in some infancy stages of some of the role that tunable light plays and a variety of other things in those environments. So we'll get into that a little bit further, but one of the studies highlighted in the Design, Research, and Behavioral Health Facilities document that Lauren was mentioning is that in 2012, a study showed that the design attributes that can decrease patient aggression, and they measure that a couple different ways, not only by episodes of acting out or atypical aggression, but also by the medication. They can track how much they have had to administer the as-needed medication that a typical unit would have for, let's say, an anxiety attack or an acute aggression kind of episode. So if they're prescribing less, they can track that. And so that study looks at the availability of private rooms, better acoustics, window views in nature, natural art, higher daylight exposure, home-like design, and visibility of staff from common areas. What happens when these elements are designed in and are intentional is that a patient not only feels more comfortable, but they feel more connected to their environment. So that, I think, in turn does impact their own emotional ability to work through something like an acute aggression episode, which becomes a risk for staff and for other patients. Luminaire design priorities. It's hard, I think, as a specifier to go through the process of making a list of priorities for something so specialized as this, because what we know to be true, logically speaking, are things that we can't necessarily utilize in a behavioral health unit. So we've listed a few of them. Hopefully most of these are things that you know, but anti-ligature, so fixed and load release. If you're not familiar with anti-ligature, that is, of course, a fixture that would not essentially withhold the weight of a person and give them a place to not only have self-harm, but to hang themselves from the fixture itself. And I know that that's an uncomfortable topic, but it's something that we need to take a look at in design. And tamper resistant, of course, IP65, common, not required. Color clarity, I think that there's a lot that we know about color clarity now, and I'm not going to give you a prescriptive CRI or TM30 numbers, but what we, I think, need to be taking a look at, knowing that our form factors are inherently limited by the fact that patients can tamper with them, is that are we spending time looking at spectral distribution? Do we know how that person not only sees themselves, but sees their visitors, their food, and then when visitors come to see them, what is the color clarity? And if you go to most of these units, it's really unfortunate. So color consistency, luminaire to luminaire, I think that's important too. I think some homogeneous between the private room and the visitor rooms is important because consistency is good. That's something that you can trust in your built environment. And static color. I know tunable white is quite trendy. We'll get into it a little bit later about some risks involved in that approach. Care zones. So when we talk about care zones, we have sort of a staff area and we have patient area priority. And so when we talk about what's most important to the patient, of course, is safety, security, cleanliness, and perception of quality. Do they have visual comfort? And I can't stress how important it is that every activity that they go through in a day is in a different room. And so there's so much we need to learn about the healthcare approach of the patient room is we're going to spend all this money on the patient room, and the patient room has to be perfect. And we're actually seeing trends of pulling people out of their patient rooms as often as possible, because in a behavioral health unit, you actually want them not only communicating with each other, but being visible by staff. So they're encouraged to stay out of their rooms. So we have to sort of flip our priority.
And actually, just to add, in the patient areas, especially in a private room, that's where most harm happens. So the idea is to kind of take them out into the different community areas.
Yes. Staff area priority. So task accuracy, productivity and alertness, color quality and consistency and cleanliness. The staff on those units, because so much of what happens is acute, and it's not like a typical healthcare design where an inpatient, they would be hooked up to a zillion monitors that tells you if something's going on with that particular patient. We don't have that luxury here. And so their alertness is extremely important. A lot of times the staff areas are underlit as to not call attention to them, but I think it's a mistake because of everything that they're responsible for. So designing forward, we have some work to do to set good examples for a standard behavioral health standardization, which we are lacking, as Lauren pointed out. And I think in order to be successful as lighting designers, we have to take a look at what that unit should look like, what it should look like. So if we were able to scrap what we know about behavioral health units from the last several years, what could we do differently to completely flip around how they work? And is that possible? For example, is it possible to have flexible spaces or multi-purpose treatment spaces where throughout the day there's some flexibility in that? are the community spaces being used in the way that they should? Is there a reason that they're not? You know, sometimes in behavioral health units, because the lighting is so bad and where they eat food, they'll take it into a common area. Is there a way to come up with some innovative ways, because our fixture requirements are less strict in these areas? So we have the opportunity to reinforce good design in areas where they are doing really important work, which is not only communicating with their care providers, but also eating and that kind of thing. There's also, obviously, as I mentioned, you know, a trend to go into more therapeutic activities that are group-based. The access to outdoor spaces and view to outdoors and access to natural light is not uncommon. We know how important that is. And patients to have control of the environment, including furniture and lighting. So maybe because of the behavioral health unit restrictions, it can't look like a typical control system. But maybe there's a way to give them some autonomy and interaction in something that's embedded perhaps in the furniture they're allowed to have, or perhaps something they could vocalize. Or we need to, I think, take a look at the fact that, yes, we're limited by fixtures in terms of anti-ligature and tamper-resistant and some of the thickness and material properties. But is there a way to challenge how they see lighting as a part of their day? I think it's something that we could work on. So much of our idea about controls is based on this little interface, and I know we're kind of getting past that, but it'd be interesting if something like Alexa could potentially help in a behavioral health environment. And maybe that's something where a patient could self-report how they're feeling, and potentially maybe the lighting goes dimmer, in very simplistic words.
So this is kind of a accumulation of all the light levels I found looking at all these guidelines, because there's not one area, even in the IS, that says clearly for every single space, because as Brian was saying, there's, if you're just looking at a behavioral health facility, there's private bedrooms or dual bedrooms, and there's a lot of community spaces. So there's not as many restrictions in these communal spaces where there's eyesight from the staff. You can still do almost any light fixture actually in those spaces, but there's not a common theme when you go from a community space or like a group therapy area or cafeteria or lounge for that matter, and then into a private bedroom. It goes from, you know, everything else is basically normal looking. I guess if you have the budget, I still see troffers in these places, you know, and then you go into more of like a jail cell looking room, which is just awful, and because the person then feels like they're being punished just because they're reaching out to help, when really we should be really supporting and congratulating them for getting the help that they need. So accumulation of foot candle levels here. So for bedrooms, where you're looking at, there's not like a bedroom specifically for behavioral health in the guidelines. So if you have a better idea, I think behind this, you maybe always want to go to a little bit higher light level, because you can always dim down if, of course, you have enough watts per square foot, right? So if you can meet all that and you can go a little higher, do so. Because even if the patient is younger, the staff may be, 65 and older and needing that extra light. So 5-foot candles, general for ambient light. And so these are kind of at horizontal planes. I didn't get into vertical planes. And if you were in the light and health talk this morning at all, you know how important that is. But desk, 40-foot candles for task minimum. Bathrooms, 30-foot candles for grooming. And usually for a bathroom, you want to have 2 side mirrors and something above. Well, these people barely even get something above. There's a downlight, maybe, in the room, or it's like a troffer. Or I've seen these kind of 6x6 downlights with metal grates over them that just look very jail cell. There's not even a vanity light in front of them. So if you look awful in the morning when you wake up, you're going to kind of feel awful throughout the day. I mean, if there's shadows and everything, I don't want to go outside during the day if my makeup's not right. I can't imagine, just looking gloomier and darker and grayer in the bathroom. So there's more that we should be doing there. And then bed headboard, so reading light would be nice, around 20-foot candles for them, minimum. So again, these are minimums. Seclusion rooms and group therapy, that is laid out in the handbook. So that part is taken directly from that. So for cleaning areas, you do want around 30-foot candles. For observation, you want around 10-foot candles. So seclusion rooms are also very scary looking. I think that is maybe what people think of when they think psychiatric ward. It's like one padded room or bed with straps on it, and then one very scary light over the ceiling that in most cases is probably just on off. I don't think anybody thought about dimming in that room ever, let alone, a nice light, because that's where maybe people will try to attack the light fixture. They're looking for attention. They will, try to get at different things in the room. But if you make the room less threatening, they won't want to do that. There's even, and this is kind of off the lighting topic, but I went and I visited a space most recently that had artwork in the bedroom, but it was actually built out of just foam core so that if somebody did attack it and break it, it wouldn't harm them at all. So there's kind of two levels to designing for behavioral health. There's the one that's very rigid and strong. You need fixtures, artwork, beds, furniture, everything to withstand the worst case scenario. And then there's this other thought, well, maybe we just make it breakable so that if something happens to it, it's not the end of the world, it's cheap to replace. And the artwork, the facility was saying that the worst thing that ever happens to it was not that anybody broke the artwork or smashed it in half, was that somebody drew it on it and added like fishes in the pond to it or something else, because they wanted to make more of the space and actually brought out like something creative in them. Because it was foam core, they felt like they could play with it and not really harm anything. So there's definitely those two schools of thought, which was interesting to see. And they have not had one piece of artwork damaged in the facility. So, if you don't call that damaging anyway. So group therapy, education, general light 20-foot candles, and then table lighting 50-foot candles. And a hallway 5-foot candles. So this is just talking about white light here. I've also had, and we get into tunable light a little bit, but amber night lighting at night, so to not disrupt the circadian rhythm. There's also checks that go on in a bedroom wing. So the staff will check on them every half an hour to an hour, just a visual check. Sometimes they need to go into the room and flip on a light. So it's kind of the same approach when I talk about healthcare lighting. Is I don't want, the nurse flipping on the bright white exam light in the middle of the night when I'm sleeping just to get checked on, or for your vitals to be checked on. It's the same thing for a bedroom. If they need to do a visual check, maybe there should be an amber nightlight, door switch. So again, that's not really called out, but think about anything you can do to make that environment more pleasant, keep the patient sleeping, because, if you get a good night's sleep, we all feel better, and then it leads to less lack of, depression and all the other anxiety disorders that we have. So the same approach needs to be taken into these rooms. That's not, I think what the IS handbook does a good job at, and you'll see in the next RP that's coming out, is defining how to understand these spaces, even if you don't see all the individual breakdowns of every single room type you need, but it's, talking about controls and dimming and this approach and night lighting, things like that. Case study. So this is just a quick article I found recently, and it was a project by ZGF Architects in Seattle called the Swedish Ballard Behavioral Health Unit. And it was a renovation of 2 floors within an existing hospital completed in the spring of 2016. So, and this actually had a concept of designing how, the patient kind of moves through a space. So they didn't have access to windows in the center communal space here, well, in the space in general. So they really wanted to bring this idea of outdoors in. So how else do you do that? Besides, of course, tunable lighting, which is all the rage, right? But I think that it was really applied nicely in this project because they mixed it with different textures and patterns, and even to where the columns maybe felt more tree-like. So this was kind of their oasis in the middle of all the bedrooms for this community space. So familiar themes like more natural patterns or water and all the architectural details, but then tunable lighting so that they could kind of keep their circadian rhythm in train. So that would be cooler in the morning and then slowly getting warmer and warmer into the nighttime. So what also happened was that because it was a community space, they're already going there anyway, they wanted to go there more often to experience this. So it brought people out of their room. So again, I mentioned earlier that a lot of harm happens when somebody's by themselves in a private patient room. So it was nice that, through lighting, through design, we can bring people. So I always said this when I started designing in healthcare, that one day I would help cure cancer with lighting or something. But I think that really, if you can help lessen medication through lighting and design, we're doing the right thing. We're all in this for a reason. So just simple idea of tunable lighting in a communal space here. And so what happened was that patients, they don't have the access to outdoors, so just summarizing. The communal space was a focus for the lighting concept and to bring people together. circadian lighting that mimics the sky. It also alludes to that relationship of nature. The finishes and lighting that grounds patients with a familiar sense of orientation so that they can kind of stay not just in train, but it keeps them grounded and, not in a sterile environment either when you see familiar textures and surroundings. And then lighting with intent to improve sleep, mood, and increase pharmaceutical efficiency. And so this hasn't been out too long. It was just 2016, but so far I think it's been over 8 months that it's been just completed. So not the final case study yet, but since then it's been nothing but positive nurse feedback that they've been receiving. So since the opening. So I'll have to follow up with all of you guys and see this in a few years what happens. But I just thought it was a really nice use of tunable lighting. So I'm going to keep going here. So trends, risks, benefits, lighting, and circadian thinking. So light and color, and I think you've probably all seen most of these slides before, but when we talk about tunable lighting, it's not just the color temperature, it's the spectrum of light. So if you were to kind of compare the two, like a 6,000 K sunny day is more around 480 nanometers on the spectrum chart for visible spectrum. So when you're designing and picking out light fixtures, think about the spectrum of light, what it's doing, the psychological benefits behind it, and that's another presentation for another day, but just think about more. It's more than just the color temperature. It's also, the CRI value and the spectrum of light. But this all affects us and how our kind of biological clock goes through the day. So, and I'll get into that more. So again, if you kind of compared 6,000 K to around 480 nanometers, and I really focus on that number because it's the wavelength of light that suppresses melatonin, our sleep hormone. So that's the one that we kind of most pay attention to when we're talking about kind of keeping our bodies in track. So that's blue light. So I think we've heard about that a lot. So when, you would use this in the morning to keep your body in train, about a half an hour minimum, I guess, to keep your body clock on track throughout the day. But it also is used to boost alertness, heightens reaction times, helps memory and cognitive function, elevates your mood. I know that I feel better on a blue and sunny day, so unfortunately not today from what I hear with all the rain, but it does increase that feeling of well-being. So anything we can do to bring that into a facility, especially if the patients, and not just the patients, the staff, the family that's visiting, anything you can do to boost the mood, it's not only going to go a long way for the patients, but it could potentially even get them out of there faster and back on to their normal track that they need to do. Reasons why blue light could be used as a negative thing. If anybody suffers from migraines in the room, I'm sure you want to stay away from that bright, white light, because actually it's that shorter wavelength of light that's almost causing a flicker into your eye, so it's very discomforting. So you don't want to get, overly stimulated as well. So things that would help them sleep, or all of us sleep, is to stay away from your digital devices, or just, going to sleep earlier. You don't want to have that blue-white light. And then I talked about eye strain, headaches, and it can even cause retinal damage. So there's a balance you have to do with blue light. Blue light is great in the morning, but you definitely don't want to have it at night, and you don't want to have an over-stimulation of it. Red and amber light, I get often asked, well, blue light wakes you up, so amber light must put you to sleep, and that's just really not the case. So amber light, it doesn't affect your circadian rhythm at all. So it's a little bit better than to light a hospital with red light, because even though red light works, red light in a hospital or healthcare, behavioral health, think about a room with red light. That's a little scary, right? Like, it looks like blood. It's a little scary movie, kind of, and it's certainly not what I would want to turn on in the middle of the night. So amber light becomes this, and actually in our culture, it means emergency, stop, or threatening. In other cultures, it means luck and destiny. So maybe if you're in a different country, you can get away with it. But for amber light, for us, it's kind of that incandescent feel. You can still see colors a little bit. You can get around the room, but it doesn't break up your circadian rhythm. So it doesn't affect you at all. So that's really what at night you want, whether it's behavioral health, your bathroom or bedroom at night, or hospital patient room. So this is... So if red light is it's the opposite of the spectrum, right? So blue is 480, so that would be in the 600 to 700 range. So this is just a general view of your body clock, your circadian rhythm. So whether you have mental issues, you're a child, you're adult, you're a senior, whatever the case may be, we all kind of go through this roughly 24-hour clock, or 24.2 actually. But some things that I like to point out. So just so you can understand that everybody, we're all people, we have this kind of biological clock innately inside of us. So our melatonin secretion stops around 7:30 a.m. in the morning. And it's 24-hour cycle roughly, because some of us are morning people, some of us are night people, and so we know that we're all different, right? But 10 a.m. you should have your highest alertness time, so that's when you should have your morning meetings maybe. And then I like to talk about 5 p.m. greatest cardiovascular efficiency and muscle strength. So if you're working out in the evenings, work out earlier in the evening versus later. And then 6:30 p.m. highest blood pressure. So don't have conversations with your significant other around that time. And then especially not highest body temperature at 7 p.m. And then your melatonin secretion starts all over again, so around 9 p.m. So again, if you have your blue light, your devices, you want to turn those off like 2 hours before you go to bed, which is recommended, which even I'm like looking at my phone before I go to bed. But there's all these great things with software programs and kind of amber, screen colors that you can change now, which is the good part. So we got to really keep introducing. If you can't do tunable lighting systems and controls and you don't have the budget for it, if there's a way to bring in daylight or just the outdoors inside in the simplest form, you can at least change the lighting at night in your room or in your bathroom, and especially for people that really need help staying in train because of their mood and because it does affect depression levels. What can we do to push design in these areas?
So I'm going to move quickly through the next few slides because of the timing, but I'm self-admittedly a skeptic of a lot of the circadian information that's out there right now, partially because I think some of it's being used and abused, and partially because I don't want to be liable for it. So the minute we claim a benefit, we also take on the responsibility of the lack of the benefit. So for us, I think that some prescriptive use of some of these lighting systems is interesting, especially what we know to be true about amber and that kind of thing. But when we use vocabulary to explain something like this to a hospital system or to nurses or that kind of thing, we have to be careful that the tunable white is very much a connection to the out of doors and to the dynamic nature of a day. Like our day, the lighting changes, and a patient should experience that because that's what we would experience outside. So I think it's an okay place to move, but I have some other observations. So I pulled out a couple quotes that I like that are sort of, that get floated around. So how circadian lighting can improve health, sleep, and mood. That sounds like an infomercial, and it's, while there's research to support some of it, I never want to be liable as a designer for that statement, because I'm not a doctor. Thanks to advancements in color tuning and lighting control technology, it is now possible to imitate the complex nature of daylight indoors. No, we can approximate it. We can pay homage to it. We can't replicate it. The health benefits of human-centric lighting using LEDs. For those of you who know me better, I'm not a big fan of the human-centric lighting because humans are the only people who need lighting. It is inherently human-centric. So pet peeve of mine on the human-centric part, but story for another day. So help maintain patients' natural sleep cycles, reduce anxiety during examinations, and aid recovery. This is all from manufacturers, by the way. So when I see that, I think, okay, you explain that to the hospital, and when their medication dosage hasn't gone down, and they're not seeing an improvement, and their nurses are making mistakes at night because of the light levels, I hope you get the first phone call, because I don't want it. And for someone who visits their own mother with some frequency, I don't want her to go through it either. How light color can affect emotions and circadian rhythms. That's right, but so can a zillion other things. So we have to be really careful about these sweeping claims because yes, lighting is our biggest tie to our circadian, day, our circadian rhythm, but so are a ton of other things. So it's like in office spaces, people are like, oh, tunable white, from 9 to 5, we're totally aligned with circadian entrainment. I'm like, but if that person's on their iPhone till 1 a.m., that's not on me. So I can't prove that their built environment is actually doing them any good. So I made this little graphic about warm and cool and the prescriptive nature of that. And here's a couple things to remember if you talk about lighting, at least this is how I look at it: the dose, the duration, and the direction. If you're familiar with the circadian stimulus, work being done by the LRC, we'll get into that in a second. These are the 3 Ds that are important to me when I take a look at where the color's going, how much of it, and what the light is. But when I am doing that prescriptive is because my intuition tells me that the architectural built environment is appropriate for that color temperature. And in addition to that, I have done no harm by making that assumption. And CCT is not completely, CCT is mutually exclusive from our circadian entrainment, right? I mean, not completely mutually exclusive, I shouldn't say it that way. But you could have a poorly distributed 4,000K do more damage than a 5,000K with a better spectral distribution. So, what can you do? So in circadian stimulus, always request the SPD, the light sources under consideration, and rely on more than just the CCT. And when we go through tunable white sources and we take a look at them, the method with which they are tuning is very important. So different manufacturers do it differently. And so know what steps they're taking. Are they drawing a line between the different color temperatures, in which case we're having some spectral issues? There's ways to compare sources and to make some smarter choices. Higher CCTs do actually provide a greater stimulus, but there's exceptions, like I mentioned. And 2 sources rated for the same CCT might have very different CS, circadian stimulus values, depending on their SPDs. So when you say, well, I did the whole patient based on circadian lighting, well, if you're using a consistent color temperature and your spectral distribution is all over the place, it's worth looking at. Designing for vertical luminance at the eye, not just on horizontal on the work plane, we talked about that. And choosing luminaires that have a best vertical to horizontal balance. So that is extremely important, that balance, especially in our periphery and for safety. And there's a reference there down below. But research and collaboration is the best way to get through that. So rely on manufacturers who have research behind what they say. So what do we know about light and health, right? We know that light impacts the performance by enabling more accuracy in visual tasks. It can assist with circadian stimulus, but we need more research on the impact in behavioral health units. We're not there yet. It affects mood and perception, and it does, and it impacts critical chemical reactions in the body, but it doesn't necessarily initiate them or like Lauren was saying about amber light in terms of falling asleep, for example. So studies do show that higher light levels link to better performance of visual tasks. Light requirements increase with age. These are all things that we are familiar with thanks to the IES research and other people. Reduce medication dispensing errors in pharmacies. Big important point there. Controlling the circadian system in hospitals in general can reduce depression, decrease length of stay, improve sleep, that kind of thing. But in behavioral health units, we know that sleep is very much affected by other things, including their medication, which is an atypical from other behavioral health units. So to get through some of the strategies, I don't really want to go over. So behavioral health today. So lighting for behavioral health is different. Hopefully you have gotten that impression. And tunable white isn't prescriptive. So dynamic white is not synonymous with health or well-being in all environments. It is not synonymous with health and well-being because you have tunable or dynamic white. There are a lot of nuances to that. So that is inherently not a health benefit. And I'm sure if I called my insurance company for my liability insurance, they would not appreciate me making those claims either. Lighting beyond aesthetics, consider the population outcome and potential risks being a huge factor in these units. Consider nuances of sleep patterns, length of stay, purpose of stay, and other key elements, including how much does the lighting play a role in the other issues or the other parts of their day, like food, socialization, the visualization of self-image. When we talk about eating disorder units and other behavioral health units, patients are making decisions all day, throughout the day, that could potentially affect their survival. They're also learning patterns that they need to take home with them. And so the perception of their self-image is important. That's why color clarity and a variety of other things matter. We also need to take into consideration autonomy and the importance of that and medication side effects, because Some medications will have a patient up all night. And so if you've put amber light in their room and they're up all night and a hospital calls you and says, I thought you said this wasn't going to happen, it's chances are you didn't do enough research about what happens in the course of an evening or a night for somebody who suffers from a serious mental illness. Utilize research-based design techniques and talk with practitioners. There's a lot of good designers out there who have lots of experience in behavioral health. Consider sleep, first do no harm, ? Right? That's our mantra, is first do no harm. But the role of sleep is it should be considered independently from circadian or tunable lighting systems. So perhaps that means just more user control and it's a static color of light. Sleep problems are more likely to affect a patient with behavioral health than the general population. And lack of sleep can contribute to issues within mental illness. And so there's important considerations on that front as well. And I know we're bringing up a lot of issues, and I hope you're getting some solutions in this too, but we're not there yet in terms of a lot of the research that we need. And treating the sleep disorder could help alleviate some other mental problems. So again, the specification side of this, and this is our last slide before our references, is that the luminaire selection has to start with safety, security, and the guidelines that we do have. But we also need to consider the emotional and aesthetic impact of lighting as it relates to other design features in the building. And I know that emotion in terms of your response to light is hard to measure, but it's very much a part of what patients who are utilizing these facilities need. So while the guidelines are good, we have a responsibility to some of their emotions as well. So, I'm sorry, go ahead. If you download the presentation online, I think it's posted on the LEDucation website, most of the resources that we've referenced today are all on this slide, and we're happy to send them to you too if you come up afterwards.
Yeah, and I think what we really just wanted to push by the end of this is that we don't have everything figured out in the lighting industry for behavioral health, and we encourage you to help it grow, challenge it, provide case studies, work with your manufacturers, whether it's tunable light or a new fixture design, and just let's take this to the next step so that the stigma changes and people don't think of padded rooms and jail cell light fixtures anymore. So with that, this is our contact information, and if you have any questions, I think we are out of time, but feel free to come on up and we'll stick around for a little bit. So thank you.